Hey everybody, today I thought would be a good day to shoot a video about what we can do to get our fish through a power outage. I actually got my generator prepped and ready to go last night in anticipation of losing power overnight, but fortunately everything was fine and we're still up and running. Fingers crossed that we won't have to resort to that. So there's a lot of different things we can do, and they start from very expensive all the way down to no cost at all. So I'll start with the more expensive stuff and I'll go over that a little more briefly. I tend to focus on the more budget friendly kind of stuff on my channel since I'm budget restricted myself. In this case, however, I did spend the money. I spent quite a lot of money, and I got a generator that's powerful enough to keep my whole entire house running. And then I also had an electrician run a line to my bus panel, so when the power goes out, I just have to flip a switch in my bus panel, turn the generator on, and my whole entire house comes back up and runs as though nothing were any different. And that is obviously the best way to do it. It's the most expensive way to do it, but you can also get smaller generators depending on your circumstances. If you've got some sort of outdoor area where you can run it, whether it's a balcony or a garage or a backyard or a front porch or whatever, but a generator, a true generator, has to be run outdoors because it is a gas-powered device, so you can't really run that inside. So if you ran a smaller generator, it would be enough to keep several tanks running, and including the heaters, the tank heaters. Your tank heaters are going to be your most energy expensive device in your aquarium. We can go without lighting them if we have to altogether. And as far as the filters and the water circulation, that's not really that energy, it doesn't consume that much energy. Even the Sun filters, the big canister filters, only use about 50 watts. If you're looking at a little hang on the back filter for a 10-gallon tank, that only runs about 5 watts or something. They're not very much at all. So even a small generator would be able to keep, this whole, if I only wanted my fish room to stay running, a small 200-watt generator, 300-watt generator, honestly, you just go ahead and buy a 1,000-watt generator. That's kind of where they start for the small ones. But that would be your next price level down. Again, still a fairly expensive option, but if you've got a lot of fish tanks, it might be worth it in the long run. Plus, a generator is always handy to have around in case you need to do other stuff with it. Moving down the list, you could go to something a little less expensive, which would be to buy a battery, a deep cycle battery, the kind that are designed to be slowly discharged over a long period of time. You can also buy a power inverter that will convert that DC electricity into AC electricity, which is what our aquariums run on. And you can basically rig up a little way to run your aquariums off of a deep cycle marine battery. And if you get a good sized marine battery, and if you've only got 3 or 4 fish tanks and you're only running the filters, you can get a day or two out of that one battery. And we're down to maybe a couple $100 at this point between buying a big, nice, good quality battery and buying an adequate sized power inverter. You're looking at a couple $100. They also make sort of pre-built battery pack with power inverters on them. They call them generators. They call them gasless generators, indoor generators. It annoys me to no end that they call these things generators, because they are not. They don't generate electricity. They are battery packs that have a built-in power inverter, so you can just plug your AC electrical stuff right into it. So those, if you want to just buy one of these generators, those are an option too, but they're pretty expensive, and you've got a limited amount of time because it's just a battery. Once it runs out, it has run out. It's just like any other battery, and if you're in a power outage situation, you'd have no way to recharge that. So those generators, those indoor generators, are extremely limited in what they can do in the long run. Again, once that battery runs dead, it's out. So if you want to get one of those kind of generators, you can make one yourself by buying a deep cycle battery and buy power inverter. You hook them together and you plug your stuff right into the power inverter and you're good to go. You've got your generator that will last you for a day or two. But again, once that battery runs out, you have no way to recharge it if you're in a power outage situation. The best budget-friendly way to do it that I found was this. I was in a power outage situation years ago when I only had a few fish tanks, and I ran out to the Walmart and bought some of these. This is called Baby Bubbles. This one is Min-O Life. These are little battery-powered air pumps that run standard little air stones, and they're designed for bait buckets or live wells and fish, fishing boats, stuff like that. And they do a good job at generating bubbles, and one of those will run for hours and hours and hours on end. They won't run for days, but you'll get a good 12 or 14 hours of runtime out of one of those. It would last you a whole day out on the boat fishing, and so it would also last you a whole day of use in the aquarium. If we're talking about these kind of power outages that we've been having, in some places, especially my friends down in Texas right now who are really struggling, days at a time without power, you're just going to have to buy lots of batteries and have a lot of batteries on backup. As far as keeping your tanks warm during a power outage, that's where I scratch my head a little bit. I don't really know what you can do. Heating our tanks is the most energy expensive thing we can do in our aquarium. Again, it doesn't cost a lot to run those filters and keep the water circulating around in the tank. Buying some C batteries or D batteries to run those little battery powered bubble makers. Again, you buy some batteries, you let them run all day. No fuss, no muss. But if you're in a house where the temperature is slowly getting colder and colder and colder, how to keep our aquariums warm, I don't know. If you've got a space heater, or you're using hurricane lamps or even candles for what little bit of heat you can get out of those candles, you could try setting, 2 bricks on either side and put a pan of water over top of it. It's going to put some warmth into that water, and then you can pour that into the tank. Don't do this by feel. If you're using hot water, if you're pouring hot water into an aquarium, be really careful when you're doing that kind of stuff. And again, I'm just throwing some ideas out there. I really don't know how you would get yourself through a power outage heating the tanks without a relatively significant source of energy. If you've got a 10-gallon tank with a small heater and you've got the battery setup that I was talking about, that one tank is fine. That's not really going to drain that battery down too fast. But if you've got one deep cycle battery and you're trying to run 4 or 5 tanks and you're trying to heat those tanks, that battery is, even if it's a big deep cycle battery, that battery is going to run down pretty fast if you're running heaters. They're just big resistance coils. A heating coil is just a big resistance coil. They're hundreds of watts usually per heater. So heating the aquarium is going to be your most challenging thing. Again, warm the water over your space heater or whatever you're doing and try to keep your tanks warm that way. If you've got a small tank, you can move. Maybe put it near the space heater, put it near a window so some sunlight shines in on it during the day and it can get some warmth from the sunlight. Anything is going to help. And lastly, the most budget-friendly option of all is just to keep in mind what the purpose of a filter is in our aquarium. It's not to take debris and stuff out of the water. That gets done, and that's part of its job, but its main function is to circulate water around our tank. Water circulation is the key to survival in your aquarium. Not only does it provide the gas exchange, it gets the bad gases out and the good gases in, but it moves the ammonia-rich water, the nitrite-rich water, that has to be moved to where your nitrifying bacteria is. Now, if you've got a bare glass tank, unfortunately, your nitrifying bacteria is probably mostly inside the filter, so moving water through the filter is ideal if you can figure out a way to do that. But in most tanks like this one, I've got nitrifying bacteria all through the tank. This tank could function just fine without a filter in it, as long as it's got circulation. I got to keep that water flowing and moving. So knowing that, it doesn't cost me anything at all to come down here with a cup or a bucket or a pitcher and just scoop water out and pour it back in, and scoop some water out and pour it back in. I'm getting that vigorous gas exchange with the bubbles and the churning of the water as I'm pouring it back in. I'm circulating it. It's flowing down to the bottom of the tank and swirling around and bringing that water back up to the surface for the gas exchange. And, if you think about like the way you perform CPR, you don't have to pump the heart constantly to keep the blood flowing continuously. You move the blood around, then you work on re-oxygenating and doing some gas exchange work in the lungs, and then you move the blood around until the lungs need refreshing, and then you move back to the lungs. A fish tank is the same way. That water doesn't constantly have to be circulated. And now remember, I'm talking about an emergency situation. I'm not talking about how to run your fish tank on a daily, day-to-day basis. In an emergency situation, to get your fish tank through a couple of days without a filter in there, simply coming down every hour or so, every 45 minutes or something, and spending 10 or 15 minutes with a cup of water, just pouring the water into that tank just over and over again, circulating that water. If you've got some little hand crank propeller thing that will circulate water, use that. I don't care how you do it, but move water around your tank. Get some agitation at the surface and circulate the water. Think of it like the CPR. You've got to move that blood around to take the oxygen where it needs to go. You got to get the bad CO2 gases out of the water. And in an aquarium, of course, we have to consider that nitrogen cycle. If that water's just sitting still in your tank, fish are producing ammonia as they swim in your tank. The ammonia is coming right out of their gills. It's not only, the stuff that's breaking down into detritus. Your fish are producing ammonia directly from their gills. So if the water in this tank is relatively stagnant, that ammonia is just dissipating out into the water column and is going to be building up. You've got to circulate water around your tank to keep the tank functioning. It's more than just the gas exchange. It's that nitrogen cycle, and all of that has to keep happening. So bottom line is, if you're really in a pinch and you can't afford anything, or the stores are closed, or you can't get out of the house, or Amazon showing up in 2 or 3 days with an air pump ain't going to do you any good this afternoon, that's your bottom line, last resort option of how to keep your fish tank alive, is to simply run the water and everything. Again, I recommend spending the money if you're serious about fish keeping. If you've got a small fish room, or if you've got 4 or 5 tanks and they're fairly elaborate, you've got money invested in fish and all the time invested in growing your plants out and everything, spending $300 or $400 on a nice generator that would be a 1,000-watt generator. Again, far beyond what any normal fish room would need. At a 1,000-watt generator, you could keep your refrigerator, functioning, and some lights on in the house during a power outage as well. And, just not a bad idea to have a generator. But if you're serious about it, you got a decent enough sized fish room, I really recommend getting at least a small generator that's big enough to keep your fish room up and running. And maybe a refrigerator or two along the way wouldn't be a bad idea either. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. That's all I can think about as far as different ways to get yourself through a power outage. Again, I will put a link down below to a couple of different options for these little baby bubbles. Once you've clicked on one, you can go down below, how Amazon works, and find out the recommendations and find the different sizes or whatever that would work for your tank. And remember, as an Amazon affiliate, I'm not being sponsored or paid or anything like that, but if you do make a purchase through one of the links I provide, I do get a little tiny slice of that pie, so I always appreciate that if you do actually use one of those links when you make a purchase. So again, check down below, look for that, and good luck, everybody. Let me know how it works out for you, or if you've got any ideas that you do, things I missed, ideas about how to keep your tank warm would come in helpful. I'll share those with anybody if I get any good ideas. So talk to me, let me know. See you on the next one. Thanks for watching, everybody.